Hi, and welcome to our demonstration of our chatbot, coronavirus myth bot. It's a persuasive chatbot that helps debunk myths through conversation, and it supports a variety of users. Here we can see our assigned team roles. The components are strongly linked, so everyone collaborated on various parts of the chatbot. Our chatbot is responsible for talking to users about rumors they may have heard surrounding COVID-19. Through the language used, we determine whether the user is a skeptic or a conspiracy theorist and adjust our persuasion strategy accordingly. We wanted our conversation with users to flow and feel as natural as possible.
So for some of the myths, we go through a decision tree of responses where we check if the user is persuaded after his response. And our approach is to give the skeptic user a logical, a credibility, and then an emotional response. And for the conspiracy user, we give them the credibility response followed by an emotional one. These users are sorted based on the severity of the rumor and the wording of their input. And we've only done this for a select number of myths just to save time.
So yeah, as has been said, there are many different, three different myths that we have implemented, mainly the 5G ones, the mask ones, and the vaccine ones. And you can see this running in Telegram. So this is the bot in Telegram here. You see, I've just started the chat, and it sends this start message at the start of every Telegram conversation. So it says, "Hello, I'm the Corona Myth bot. Can I ask any questions?" So, just for example, we're going to say that we heard that masks actually restrict your breathing. And see what that says. So this is an appeal to try and convince me that this is not true. So I could say that I disagree with this. And it should try a different appeal. There we go, so it's tried an appeal there. Try another one. I don't believe you. See, it's tried a different appeal. I think that is an emotional appeal there. And then finally, let's try one more time. I don't believe you. You see, it says, "I'm sorry I couldn't convince you." And then it tries its final appeal strategy here is asking, where did you hear this information from? So let's say I heard it on Twitter. And it says, information on social media platforms, take with a grain of salt, basically. And then finally ask, is there anything else I can help you with? So if you look in the diagram, you can see what this has done here. It's started, utter greet, waited for the user input, then got all the intent info in the NLU, figured out it was one of the new intents that we've added that has 3 different appeals for it. So went down here and then figured out whether they were a skeptic or a conspiracy person. So I think they tried a logical appeal first. That didn't work. They tried credibility appeal. That didn't work. Tried emotional appeal. That didn't work. So it said utter failed, and then tried to figure out the news source. They told you the news source, but it was not a good news source. So you add bad news source, you reset all the slots, and then wait to see if there's anything else. So we can go back and show another conversation here. So this one is just a one-off to show. So for some of the responses, we haven't got 3 different appeals. So this one we've only got 1 different appeal. Social distance makes masks useless. So try that, and you see it's appealed now. So you can see here it's another response about masks, but instead of using these responses, which are about it restricting your breathing, it's looked at social distance to figure out that's the sub-myth that we're worried about. And so I can say, okay, I believe that. So I'm glad I could help. Where did you hear about this? Just for example, we'll just say, I don't want to tell you. To tell you. Yes, fair enough. Is there anything else I can help you with? And just final one, just to show the pre-existing intents. So there was one, how long is the incubation period? Incubation period. And if we run that one, you see it's based on our just simple one-off stories for dealing with those previous intents. It said, that's a good question, and responded to you based on that. So for that second conversation we did about the masks and the social distance, it does the same until it gets down to the 3 appeals or 1, and it realizes this is just a one-off thing that we've got, one-off myth about masks impacting social distancing. So it goes here, figures out if it's a logical or credibility appeal, utters that, and then it's either the user says they're convinced or they failed. That's it. It's only got one appeal strategy here. So in our case, we said we were convinced. It came down to the find news source. We said we didn't want to tell them. So then it came down reset slots and then anything else. And then the final thing we did, back up here, was a new intent. We used an existing intent. So it went down here, just did a simple one-off rule or story to end it, and went back up here, resetting all the slots and ready for anything else the user might say.
Okay. So the bot is built using Rasa for both the NLU and the core to make interfacing between these easier. So the NLU uses intents and entities to figure out what the user is saying, using these to identify the myth, the specific context or sub-myth being talked about, as well as differentiating the user between a skeptic, a conspiracy theorist, or just asking general questions. So using stories, rules, and custom actions, the DM implements the decision tree shown earlier. These stories provide the general conversation flow, with custom actions looking at how the slots have been filled, and that is the response is then picked from that. Our rules handle basic conversation queues as well. So once the output has been selected by the DM, the NLG creates this response and supplies it to the bot to be sent to the user. And then the bot waits for the next input from the user depending on the context. Okay. So this is here is the example of the code. This is the NLU section. So if we use the user asking about the vaccine causing autism as an example, so it will select, based on the NLU examples, it will select the correct intent. So in this case, skeptic asking about vaccine myths. So if they ask the highlighted question, for example, it will take the myth type as being vaccines and the subtype as asking about autism in particular. So okay, so these entities then sent to the stories where it checks for those and the subtype, which is autism, and then calls the corresponding action, which is in the actions, our custom actions file, which then generates the response from the bot, as well as creating a checkpoint to the persuasion check, which happens after the user has replied. So the response created by the DM leads in the actions file leads here. So in terms of the autism and vaccines, as it's a skeptic, the first response is a logical appeal. So it picks out the correct appeal as the one highlighted and sends that to displays that to the user, and then waits, as per the previous slide, it waits for the user to say whether or not they've been persuaded effectively.
So for the future work, we want to add more responses to the NLG so we can have multiple persuasive appeals for each intent and more responses to the user. Also, we want to recognize more myths and submits. By adding them, we will get, by adding more submits, we will get into the detail about the myth and respond better to the user and make it easier to persuade. So we also want to store how often people mention specific news sources. So these statistics will be used with different users, and we will explain them how a lot of users before them use the same source and how many times they have gotten the fake information from the source. We also want to test the bot on users to see on the real users to see how persuasive it is. Because of the ethical form approval rejection, we couldn't test the bot on real users. Getting feedback will help us to improve more. Also, we want to add more persuasive techniques. Currently, we have 4 main ones. So currently we have logical emotional credibility and the reliability of the source. the user got the information from. We'll add more persuasive techniques just to give us more variety to persuade the user more effectively. Thanks for listening to the presentation. If there is any questions, we are happy to answer.